Hey everybody, quick programming note before we get into the show. Next week, we're going to be talking more about the Route 29 Stalker, and as part of that, we want to hear what you think. What are your thoughts? What do you think happened? Who do you think it was? We'll get into some of the possibilities in this week's show, but we definitely want to hear from you. And you can do that by visiting our Patreon for free at deviantpodcast.com or visit us on social, on TikTok, on Instagram at deviant.podcast. There are sections of this week's show that may be difficult for some audiences.
March 29th, and it's supposed to be spring, but this home in Harrisonburg is draped in ice, as if Mother Nature won't allow spring to come here until 25-year-old Alicia Reynolds is found. That's because this is where Alicia grew up.
Somewhere in central Virginia, along the rolling hills, horse farms, and wineries, there's truth. Truth about what happened on March 2nd, 1996. And truth about what happened to 25-year-old Alicia Reynolds. She's building a life in Baltimore with her husband Mark and working to cure a debilitating disease when she disappears from Route 29 in central Virginia. And around that area, there is a lot of uncertainty.
Because Alicia's abduction and murder is not the end, nor is it the beginning of the story. It just seems like the natural starting point. The Route 29 Stalker story, and all it means in the public consciousness, is one that eludes truth and has for nearly 30 years. There are possibly other crimes, possibly other victims.
A few times, it seems to get close to some kind of resolution, some sort of answer. It never really does, though.
But that doesn't mean it never will.
We're all wired differently. Some of us are wired for good, some of us are wired for bad. But a select few step outside of all society's boundaries. From Cold Open Media, this is Deviant, the Route 29 Stalker, Part 2.
Welcome back to Deviant, where we chase the truth into the dark corners of what people are capable of. I'm Andrew Iden.
And I'm Dan Szematowicz.
In May of 1996, when Alicia Reynolds' body is found, the search for the person responsible is stretching into its second month. Details about Alicia's murder are few and far between, even to this day. Police haven't released a lot because there's value in not telling everything about a crime scene, to keep a lid on things only the killer will know. Among the thousands of tips that come in, women who call to say, hey, something weird happened to me along that road.
They tell stories of a man in a black truck, repeatedly signaling to them that they should pull over, that there's something wrong with their car. It's a trap, disguised as a sort of Good Samaritan gesture. Police even have a sketch, a white male with brown hair and a bluish shirt that looks anywhere from 30 to 50.
All these reports started pouring in.
That's Barbara Norden. She's a longtime Virginia journalist and writer. We met her in the last episode.
I think there'd been 16 reported stops, 16 or 17 reported stops all up and down between Charlottesville and Culpeper, which is about 70 minutes north of Charlottesville.
Here's Patrick Showalter again, Alicia Reynolds' twin brother.
They started talking about the US 29 Stalkers stuff right away, as in all these other women started coming out saying, hey, this guy stopped me when I was traveling. That's when we started finding out about some of these women being let go without, anything being done to them. Then some were injured.
Several of them had actually gotten into his truck. He would say that sparks were coming underneath their car and it would be unsafe to drive. Some of them blew him off. Some of them, I guess, wouldn't even talk to him when he came up to their car, very wisely.
One witness comes forward with a terrifying story from February of 1996, just prior to Alicia's abduction. While driving on Route 29, a man in a black truck pulls up next to her, trying to let her know that there's something wrong with her car. She pulls over. He offers to help and convinces her to get in the truck. And then he attacks.
He had shoved her head into his lap, and so clearly he wanted to sexually assault her, and he was starting to strangle her, and she was fighting him off, and her door flew open. She thinks that he actually reached over and opened the door, but her leg was caught in the seat belt, which is just harrowing. And he dragged her for a little bit, but she freed herself, but that broke her ankle, and she was able to get to help. But by the time the police realized they didn't, possibly because she is not a native English speaker, they just, which is frustrating, assumed it was her husband, even though she was trying to tell them, no, I was abducted, this isn't my husband. And they may have made infuriating assumptions that she was probably in an abusive marriage. Well, so if they had listened to her, they could have issued an alert right then, and she could have described in detail what he looked like, what his truck was like. And undoubtedly, they probably could have found him, or, they would have had a chance. But by the time they finally listened to what she was saying, that was at least a day later. It was too late.
For Alicia's family, the stories of these assaults and highway encounters are incredibly frustrating because they come too late. It's a frustration that simmers for nearly 30 years.
In the wake of your sister's death and disappearance, obviously you mentioned before kind of there was a lot of witnesses that came forward and talked about. I came across a guy on Route 29 who was banging on his steering wheel and trying to pull me, get me to pull over. I imagine there was some frustration on your part. Now we're hearing about these accounts, right?
Right.
Like, why didn't we hear about these before?
Right.
And the frustration that comes along with that. How was that a point of frustration for you and your family?
Yes, I think it's still a point of frustration. I mean, when you look at the case, there were 10,000 leads. And how come no one wrote down a license plate number? Like some of the simplest things that could have been done didn't happen. It's like, how can we have all this information that people have shared, things that they saw or suspicions they had, and how can her case not be solved at this point?
I think I'm probably the one that has been the most detached from getting the case solved.
Barbara Josenhans is Alicia's younger sister.
I think Patrick has been a little bit more fired up about it, and I think my mom has been a little bit more fired up about it. My dad and I are more alike in that way, and my mom and my brother are more chomping at the bit.
I would say my mom has been more angry over the years. She's been wanting to push, maybe get, for some answers and things. She's certainly reached out to some other journalists and things to try to get movement in the case. But I don't know. To be honest, I don't really know how hopeful they are that it'll ever get solved.
I think it would give them a great sense of peace to know what happened ultimately, to really know why. Why did you do this to anybody? Why was it Alicia? Why was it that day? Why in that way? Just all of it. Like, there's just so many questions about it. I think that would give them great peace of mind. Alicia's death upended our family dynamics 100%, and we've been pretty resilient in the face of that. We've all stayed connected and have relationships with each other, which I'm very grateful for, because I know a lot of families aren't that fortunate when something tragic happens.
I think for most of the last 28 years, I've been pretty pessimistic that they're going to solve it. But I think recently, in the last year or two, I've grown more hopeful because I'm sensing maybe some movement in the case. Maybe it's because I've talked to the Virginia State Police. Maybe it's because some of these other technologies, seeing some of these other unsolved cases become solved, has given me some hope. And it's not that I want a trial or anything, but I would like some answers. I would like to know, like, what really happened. Why has it taken so long for the Virginia State Police to find her killer? Why hasn't the stalker? It's like he just stopped after he killed my sister. He just stopped. There were no more US 29 stalking cases, and yet there were other murders in the area. That whole US 29 corridor. There were other murders, and unsolved crimes. It's like, man, just seems like there've got to be some answers out there.
This is the most confounding part of this case, because Patrick's right. After Alicia is found, the stories stop. The mysterious man flagging motorists down, he's never seen again. But the murders of females in rural central Virginia keep happening. And the idea that there's a Route 29 stalker only grows stronger.
A few weeks after Alicia Reynolds' body is found, Julie Williams and Lolly Winans, a couple from Minnesota and Maine, turn onto Skyline Drive. It's the north entrance to Shenandoah National Park in Front Royal, Virginia. That also happens to be my hometown. Here's journalist Barbara Norden again.
They were going to have this wonderful, wonderful journey. You know, Andrew, you're probably familiar with what? The Appalachian Trail, Skyline Drive,
Very
this
much so.
wonderful, wonderful odyssey. They had Lolly's dog, Sky, and some kind of, large breed, friendly dog. And they made camp off what's called the Bridle Trail, because you can take, I guess, horses down it. It's near Skyland Lodge, and Skyland is an area with cabins and everything that you can rent. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot next to a river and a big creek, at least. And they had made camp, and they were expected back to civilization.
Julie and Lolly are about 35 miles from Culpeper, which you'll remember is where Alicia is last seen, and they are 45 miles from where her body is found. While camping in those woods, they're naturally isolated. That's sort of the whole point.
I think this was Memorial Day weekend, and I think probably by that Monday or whatever, they were supposed to be back. And they weren't. I have the timeline of the families becoming concerned and thinking, well, did they decide to extend their holiday and didn't think to call or what? And then they realized, no, they wouldn't have done that. The search was on all over the park, and they found their bodies. Both of them had been bound with ligatures, which I think might have been like pajama bottoms. Their legs and hands had been bound.
Their throats are cut, and they've been sexually assaulted. Are those details similar to the murder of Alicia Reynolds? We don't know. As we mentioned earlier, her cause of death is never released. The Virginia State Police don't talk much about what they learn when her body is found, and they declined our requests to interview them. But both crimes are close enough in time and distance for the public to connect the dots.
For 6 years, there are no arrests in the Shenandoah Park murders. And then in 2002, Attorney General John Ashcroft names a suspect in the murders of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans, a man by the name of Darrell Rice. According to police, he's seen on surveillance video entering the park around the time of their murders. And in 1997, attempts a kidnapping in the park.
After Julie and Lolly were killed, he stalked a woman biking along the Skyline Drive, and when she stopped, I think she thought he'd go around her, but instead she realized that he was trying to catch her, and with bicycle cleats on, ran into the forest off the drive, very heavily wooded, and he was following her. She tried to kind of shove her bike at him when they first interacted, and he was furious at her and was telling her to show him her breasts, and was furious and threw a water bottle at her, and she managed to just keep running and then hide behind a huge fallen log, and he was pursuing her in his truck on this small road into that, access road, and he realized he wouldn't be able to get over the log, so he gave up. And because a park ranger came by almost immediately, just by chance, they stopped him at the exit. He had taken his license plate off, changed his T-shirt, and taken his baseball cap off or something. He demonstrated then his fury at women, and this was very close to where Julie and Lolly had been murdered.
But the case against Darrell Rice, the connections they've made to him and the Shenandoah Park murders, all of that falls apart for prosecutors in 2003. Because the DNA found at the scene of Julie and Lolly's murder, it's not his.
Good morning. I'm Stanley Metter, Special Agent in charge of the FBI Richmond Field Office. I'm pleased to be joined here today by Christopher Cavanaugh, United States Attorney for the Western District of Virginia.
On June 20th, 2024, the Shenandoah National Park murders are finally solved.
We brought you all here today for an announcement we've been working towards for nearly 3 decades. 28 years ago, 2 women, Laura Winans and Julianne Williams, known by their family and friends as Lolly and Julie, were viciously murdered in Shenandoah National Park. Their murders sparked shock and fear throughout the community and nation. Today, we are proud to stand here and tell you we now know who is responsible for this heinous crime. Today, we are here to tell you our positive match is to Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a convicted serial rapist, originally from the Cleveland, Ohio area.
That match comes through DNA testing. Walter Leo Jackson died in prison in 2018. So naturally, given all of this, the question becomes, is Walter Leo Jackson the Route 29 stalker? Police won't say. And what about Darrell Rice? Could he be the one? We may never know that either, because 2 weeks after that press conference you just heard, Darrell Rice is struck and killed by a motorist on a Missouri highway. Which means any connection, any involvement, or any link to Alicia Reynolds, through Rice or Jackson, dies with them. It's June 27th, 2002, and Richard Evanitz is in a standoff with police in Sarasota, Florida. He's cornered after being on the run for several days in connection with the sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. And after the girl escapes and tells police about what happened and who did it, they search Evanitz's apartment and find evidence linking him to the murders of 3 teenage girls, sisters Katie and Kristen Lisk and Sophia Silva. All 3 are from Spotsylvania, Virginia, about 30 miles from where Alicia Reynolds disappears.
The timing lines up too. All of Evanitz's known murders happened in 1996 and early 97. And while he's on the run, Richard Evanitz tells family members that he's committed a lot of crimes, more than what's known or suspected. And even though he says that, he doesn't get into details. Back in Florida, where he's in that standoff with police, it all ends when he puts a gun to his head and pulls the trigger. Evanitz is one of those names that keeps surfacing as the potential Route 29 stalker. A lot of the circumstances and timings match. But there's another name that's recently surfaced too. It's one you're probably familiar with.
We have some breaking news at 6. A major break in the notorious Gilgo Beach murders. Police arrest a suspect in connection to the serial killings. And for decades, he lived just across the bay from where the remains were found.
Police have had a major break in this case. They've arrested Rex Heuermann, and he's pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of murder.
Ever since architect Rex Heuermann was arrested in July, accused of killing 3 of 4 women discovered in Gilgo Beach in 2010, investigators in states where Heuermann has relatives or property are looking at cold cases in their jurisdictions.
One of those jurisdictions is pretty interesting. Heuermann's mom, Dolores, lived in Virginia. Palmyra, actually. It's a small town south of Charlottesville and a 30-minute drive from the area of Route 29 where Alicia went missing. Heuermann is known to have visited his mother during the same time period as the murders and disappearances we've been telling you about.
When it comes to actually being the Route 29 stalker, both of those names, Heuermann and Evanitz, are intriguing possibilities. Proximity and timeline, they both kind of connect. Here's Alicia's brother and sister, Patrick and Barbara, again.
Both of them are intriguing possibilities. You know, I think for many, many years, I really thought that Evanitz was probably the murderer, but for whatever reason, I guess he's not. Because I think if there were evidence, there would have been Our family would have been told that, that he was the prime suspect or could be confirmed as the killer, and he hasn't been. Heuermann is an intriguing character because he's a smart guy who traveled down the US 29 corridor to visit his mom. And so whoever killed my sister was probably a really smart guy, like a highly intelligent person that knew how not to get caught. I think both of those suspects had that characteristic. When you have a bunch of unsolved cases, I think you have to start looking for commonalities between all those cases. And so I don't have a strong feeling either way at this point, but I guess I've leaned kind of the other way. It's like maybe that's because I want my sister's case to be special. It's different than all the rest.
I'm curious about Rex Heuermann. Some things about him make sense to me as a possibility. Some things don't. I'd like to see both of those things, both Evenitz and Heuermann and whoever else they have. I would just like to know definitively, no, it's not them. And I haven't gotten that impression from anyone yet. I've deliberately chosen not to take deep dives into these things because I just felt like there was better things to spend my energy on, like raising my children and having a whatever kind of life I could have. I said for a long time, I think I told this to a reporter at some point, that at one point I said, I hope this guy's just dead because I don't want to have to deal with a trial. I don't want to look him in the eye. I don't want him to look at me. I don't want him to know anything about my life. So I'd like to know who did it, but I'd like him to be dead already.
We told you at the beginning of our last episode that anything is possible here, that everything is out there. And based on all these names and all these potential links, that's still true. Depending on who you talk to about the Route 29 stalker, especially in Virginia, you're likely to get a couple different reactions.
It could have just been a sexual predator who lived along that stretch and just did it. And after he killed Alicia, he knew he had to stop. And maybe someone around him also knew what he had done and, threatened to expose him if he ever did anything again.
That's Barbara Norden.
I think the stalker I think it was one man. I mean, what are the odds? I drove 29 for 30 plus years when I lived over there. And women have, along that stretch, have driven that 29 route between like DC and Charlottesville a million times over their lives, and never except for this short period of time. And the MO and everything matched so exactly, time after time after time. I think it was one man.
Others are convinced the man waving his arms, the man in the black or brown truck flagging down female motorists, he may still be out there. And all these years later, when he's back in Virginia, either on the state roads or interstates, Alicia's brother Patrick still has his eyes wide open.
I'm driving up 81 to go back to visit my parents. I'm still looking for that truck, the one that was on the posters with the racing stripe or the Puma stripe or whatever you want to call it. I still look for that truck to this day.
So yes, there were other crimes, and they were in parts of Virginia that aren't far away from where Alicia goes missing. So making those connections is easy to do. But were all these encounters on the highway with the same man? Was he Leo Jackson, or Rex Heuermann, or Darrell Rice, or Richard Evenitz? Or is he a sort of composite boogeyman that's grown into legend in the almost 3 decades since? And does somebody, somewhere, know something?
What bothers me in part is that I suspect that a wife or parent or roommate really wondered about the guy. I mean, like that every time this happened, he seemed upset when he came home, or he was always out on those days, or something seemed wrong and they just couldn't bring themselves to, I don't know. That maybe he was a complete hermit and no one had any idea what he was up to.
These are all questions we've tried asking the Virginia State Police. But at the end of the day, none of this really matters to the Showalter family. Because regardless of who it is, for them, the Route 29 stalker and all he did and all he's capable of is very real. Alicia's sister Barbara Josenhans.
It was really a life-changing experience for me that's followed me. I mean, it affected every decision I made thereafter. It's all worked out. I have a great life, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I wonder how my life would be different if she hadn't died. I mean, we all have those inflection points, but that's a pretty big one. The body keeps the score, right? Somatic memory. Every year, a few days before March 2nd, things start happening to me. Like, I don't get sick, but like my mental health goes a little haywire. And I don't know why. It took me several years to realize I have to prepare myself for the anniversary of her death. And I usually don't tell people the story until I know I can trust them and until I kind of know how they're going to react about it, that I can trust that I can handle their reaction, because it's always really uncomfortable. And so, yes, this has shaped me and affected me, but I just want people to know that it hasn't defined me. Like, I haven't let myself get mired in it. When it wasn't solved after the first year, I kind of just thought it's probably never going to be solved. And I remember talking to a police officer one day about it. Like, this came up. He was like the security guard at the school or something, and we were talking about it. And he said, well, one way or the other, at some point, whoever committed this crime will be caught. I mean, maybe not for your sister's crime, but for some other crime. And he will pay, he or she, I guess, but probably a he, will pay for it. So that always kind of just gave me a sense of comfort. We would love the case to be solved, yes, just to have that extra bit of closure. But the only way I've been able to survive and move forward the last 28 years is just deciding that it probably won't be solved and not hoping for it to be, not trying to force something that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I look at pictures of our family at my wedding and I see the sadness. It's so hard as a twin sometimes to separate yourself from your twin, to feel like you've got a special place, And here I am at my wedding, and it's like you're torn. Like, my sister's not there, and we're mourning her death. So, yeah, you end up suffering. I suffered a lot of trauma, a lot of loss through that whole process,
Next time on Deviant, Dan and I are going to try and unpack some more of the story, the spider web of possibilities, and we'll try to separate coincidence from convenience, and even jump into what we think and what you think.
Let us know your thoughts by visiting deviantpodcast.com or on Instagram and TikTok at deviant.podcast. So next time, thanks for listening. The executive producers of Deviant are Clark Goldband, Andrew Iden, and me, Dan Szematowicz. Clark is our lead editorial producer and booker, and Andrew and I are the writers, producers, and story editors. Editorial and production consultation, as always, comes from Jenny Ament, with original scoring from the great Shuvo Sir. Marketing, sales, and distribution support comes from our partners at Gemini 13. Deviant is a production of Cold Open Media.